The winter winds howled through the wooden walls of the Shiratori household, biting at the exposed skin of anyone brave enough to venture outside. It was the early 1900s, and life in Aomori, a small village on the northern tip of Japan's Honshu Island, was not easy. The sea was unforgiving, the land hard, and the winters longer than anyone could bear. Yoshie Shiratori was born in 1907 to a fisherman's family. Life was bleak from the start. His father, Takao, spent weeks out at sea, battling the relentless ocean, while his mother, Keiko, struggled to make ends meet at home. They had little money, and Yoshie quickly learned that the world was a harsh and unforgiving place. Poverty surrounded them, gnawing at their hopes for a better life. From a young age, Yoshie felt the weight of this poverty. He watched his father return from the sea with hands cracked and bleeding from pulling nets, eyes hollow from the exhaustion that seeped into his bones. His mother was thin and frail, her body worn down by the constant struggle to keep her children fed and warm. Life in Aomori was not for the weak, and Yoshie knew that if he wanted to survive, he would have to be strong. As a child, Yoshie was resourceful and determined. He would often sneak into orchards or fish in forbidden rivers to help his family. He had an innate ability to slip through tight spots and escape notice, something that would serve him well in the years to come. But even as he grew older and stronger, Yoshie couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant for something more than the life of a fisherman's son. He dreamed of escaping Aomori, of finding a better life somewhere far from the cold, hard shores of his village. But dreams were dangerous in a place like Aomori, where survival was more important than hope. By the time Yoshie was 18, he had grown restless. The life of a fisherman tied to the unforgiving sea didn't appeal to him. He was strong and quick-witted, and he knew that he was capable of more than what the village had to offer. So, in the summer of 1925, Yoshie left Aomori in search of a better life. He traveled to the city of Sapporo, where he found work as a laborer. The city was a far cry from the small, insular world of Aomori. It was bustling, chaotic, full of people and opportunity. Yoshie felt a sense of freedom he had never known before, but it was short-lived. Life in the city was expensive, and Yoshie quickly found that his wages as a laborer weren't enough to support him. He began to fall into old habits, stealing small amounts of food or money to make ends meet. It wasn't long before he found himself in trouble with the law. Yoshie was arrested for petty theft and sentenced to a short stint in prison. It was his first taste of life behind bars, and he hated it. The cramped cells, the stench of unwashed bodies, the constant surveillance, it all felt like a cage. Yoshie vowed that he would never allow himself to be trapped again. But prison also taught Yoshie something important. He was not like the other men in there. Where they saw walls, he saw opportunities. Where they gave in to the system, he resisted. Even in the darkest moments, Yoshie never lost the spark of rebellion that burned inside him. Yoshie's first brush with the law should have been a wake-up call, but instead it only fueled his desire for freedom. He returned to the streets of Sapporo, determined to live on his own terms. But in the winter of 1933, everything changed. Desperate for money, Yoshie fell in with a group of criminals who were planning a heist. They targeted a wealthy merchant who was rumored to keep large sums of money hidden in his home. The plan was simple: break in, take the money, and disappear into the night. But things went horribly wrong. During the robbery, the merchant awoke and tried to fight off the intruders. In the ensuing chaos, one of Yoshie's accomplices panicked and stabbed the merchant. The man died within minutes, his blood pooling on the floor of his lavish home. Yoshie and the others fled, but it wasn't long before the police caught up with them. Yoshie was arrested and charged with murder, even though he hadn't wielded the knife. The law didn't care. He had been there, and that was enough. In the eyes of the court, he was guilty. Yoshie was sentenced to life in prison, a sentence that felt like a death sentence. The thought of spending the rest of his life in a cell was unbearable. But even as the prison doors closed behind him, Yoshie refused to give up. He had escaped once before, and he would do it again. Yoshie's first years in Aomori prison were brutal. The guards were harsh, the conditions inhumane. The prison was a bleak, gray fortress surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. The cells were cramped and cold, the air thick with the smell of sweat and despair. But Yoshie was no ordinary prisoner. He was clever, observant, and patient. He studied the routines of the guards, the layout of the prison, the weaknesses in the system. Every day, he learned something new, tucking the knowledge away for the moment when he would need it. It was during this time that Yoshie developed a reputation among the other prisoners. He was known as someone who could survive anything, who could outsmart anyone. The guards watched him closely, but even they couldn't fully understand the depths of his determination. In 1936, after 3 long years in Aomori prison, Yoshie saw his chance. He had been assigned to work in the prison's kitchen, a place where he could move around more freely. One night, he managed to slip away from his duties and find his way to the roof of the prison. From there, he scaled the walls and disappeared into the night. For weeks, Yoshie was a free man. He wandered the countryside, living off the land and evading capture. But freedom was fleeting. Eventually, the authorities caught up with him, and he was returned to prison. But the taste of freedom had only made him more determined. He knew that he could escape again, and he would. After his recapture, Yoshie was transferred to Sapporo Prison, a place known for its high security measures. The guards were well aware of his escape history, and they made sure to keep him under constant surveillance. His cell was small and windowless, the walls thick with reinforced steel. The prison was designed to break men like Yoshie, to crush any hope of escape. But Yoshie was not easily broken. He spent his days watching, waiting, and planning. He knew that the guards were overconfident. They believed that the prison was impenetrable, that no one could possibly escape. Yoshie was determined to prove them wrong. In 1942, after nearly 5 years in Sapporo Prison, Yoshie made his move. He had managed to fashion a small tool from a piece of metal he had found during his work in the prison's workshop. Late one night, when the guards were distracted, he used the tool to pick the lock on his cell. Then, with nerves of steel, he slipped out of the cell and made his way to the laundry room. The laundry room had a large vent that led to the outside. Yoshie squeezed through the narrow opening and climbed up onto the roof. The night was cold, the air sharp against his skin, but Yoshie didn't care. He was free again. Yoshie fled into the mountains, where he lived for several months, surviving on wild plants and small animals. He moved constantly, never staying in one place for too long, always looking over his shoulder. The authorities searched for him tirelessly, but Yoshie was a master of evasion. He knew how to disappear. But once again, fate caught up with him. In 1943, Yoshie was captured by the police after a former prison guard recognized him in a small village. He was returned to prison, where the guards were even more determined to keep him locked away. Yoshie's return to Akita Prison in 1943 was a demoralizing blow, but it only fueled his resolve. Akita was notorious for its security. It was designed to be an impenetrable fortress. The guards were vigilant, and the cells were fortified with thick steel and concrete. The prison had a reputation for breaking even the most determined of prisoners, and Yoshie was now its newest inhabitant. His cell at Akita was a windowless box, designed to prevent any chance of escape. The walls were thick, the ceiling reinforced, and the small ventilation slit was tightly secured. The prison guards were well aware of Yoshie's history and had taken extra precautions to ensure that he wouldn't slip through their fingers again. But Yoshie was not easily discouraged. He spent his days in solitary confinement, meticulously studying every detail of his surroundings. He observed the guards' routines, the patterns of their patrols, and the flaws in the prison security. He knew that he would need to be patient and precise if he wanted to succeed. Months passed, and Yoshie endured the harsh conditions of Akita Prison with a stoic resolve. He was subjected to frequent searches and interrogations, but he kept his plans to himself. He knew that any slip-up could cost him his chance at freedom. One night, after nearly a year of careful planning, Yoshie made his move. He had managed to acquire a small piece of metal and used it to fashion a makeshift tool. Timing his escape with precision, he used the tool to pick the lock on his cell. With bated breath, he slipped out and made his way to the laundry room, where he had previously identified a possible escape route. Climbing through the ventilation shaft, Yoshie reached the roof of the prison. The night was cold and silent, but he was undeterred. He had spent months preparing for this moment, and he was determined to see it through. Lowering himself down the outer wall using a rope made from torn sheets, he finally touched the ground outside the prison. Once again, Yoshie was free, but he knew that he couldn't stay in one place for too long. He made his way to the countryside where he lived in hiding, constantly on the move to avoid capture. Life on the run was challenging, but Yoshie adapted quickly. He traveled through the rural areas of northern Japan, taking odd jobs and living off the land. He was a master of blending in, using false identities and disguises to evade the authorities. During this period, Yoshie learned to live with constant fear and uncertainty. Every day was a struggle for survival, and every night was spent in hiding. He had to be resourceful, using his skills to find food, shelter, and safety. He learned to trust no one and to keep his plans to himself. In 1944, Yoshie made his way to a small village in the foothills of the Chugoku Mountains. The village was isolated and had a reputation for being friendly to travelers. Yoshie hoped that he could find some respite here, but he was always wary of being recognized. For several months, Yoshie managed to stay under the radar. He worked as a laborer in the village, keeping to himself and avoiding any behavior that might draw attention. But even in this seemingly quiet life, he could not escape his past. The police were still searching for him, and the authorities were determined to capture him once again. Yoshie's life in the village seemed peaceful, but he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. His fears were confirmed one fateful day when he discovered that someone had betrayed him. A former associate from his days in Sapporo had recognized him and reported his whereabouts to the authorities. One night, as Yoshie was sleeping in his small hut, the police surrounded the village. The villagers were bewildered and frightened as the authorities stormed through, searching for the fugitive. Yoshie had no choice but to flee, leaving behind the life he had built for himself. The chase was intense, with Yoshie running through the dense forests and rugged terrain of the Chugoku Mountains. He used every skill he had learned over the years to evade capture, but the police were relentless. Despite his best efforts, Yoshie was eventually cornered and recaptured. He was returned to prison, but this time he was placed in a maximum security facility known as Fukuoka Prison. The prison was infamous for its strict conditions and high walls, and Yoshie knew that escaping from here would be even more difficult than before. Fukuoka Prison was a fortress, a grim reminder of the authorities' determination to keep Yoshie locked away. The prison was surrounded by high walls topped with barbed wire, and the guards were armed and vigilant. The cells were small and cramped, with minimal contact with the outside world. Yoshie was placed in solitary confinement, where he spent most of his time planning his next escape. He knew that Fukuoka Prison had a reputation for being inescapable, but he was determined to prove that even the most secure prison could be breached. The days in solitary confinement were long and monotonous, but Yoshie used the time to refine his escape plan. He observed the routines of the guards, the patterns of their patrols, and the weaknesses in the prison's security. He spent countless hours thinking about every detail, every possibility. One night, Yoshie managed to acquire a small tool from the prison's workshop. With this tool, he began to work on a plan that involved creating a tunnel from his cell to the outside. It was a complex and dangerous plan, but Yoshie was committed to seeing it through. The construction of the tunnel was a meticulous process. Yoshie had to be careful to avoid detection, working slowly and quietly to avoid drawing attention. He used his limited resources to dig a tunnel that would lead from his cell to a nearby drainage ditch. The work was grueling and required immense patience. Yoshie spent every free moment working on the tunnel, making slow but steady progress. He knew that the success of his plan depended on maintaining secrecy and avoiding any mistakes. As the tunnel took shape, Yoshie had to contend with the constant threat of discovery. The guards conducted regular inspections, and Yoshie had to be cautious to ensure that his activities went unnoticed. He also had to deal with the physical toll of digging and maintaining the tunnel, which left him exhausted and sore. Despite the challenges, Yoshie remained determined. He knew that this was his best chance to escape, and he was willing to endure whatever it took to achieve freedom. After several months of hard work, the tunnel was nearly complete. Yoshie had created a narrow passage that led from his cell to the drainage ditch outside the prison walls. The tunnel was concealed well, but Yoshie knew that he had to be careful to avoid detection during the escape. The night of the escape arrived, and Yoshie was filled with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He had spent months preparing for this moment, and he knew that everything depended on its success. He carefully made his way through the tunnel, moving slowly to avoid making noise. As he reached the end of the tunnel and emerged into the drainage ditch, Yoshie felt a surge of adrenaline. He was free once again, but he knew that the hard part was far from over. The authorities would be searching for him, and he had to be smart and cautious to avoid capture. Yoshie made his way through the darkened streets of Fukuoka, using his knowledge of the area to navigate safely. He traveled by night and hid by day, always on the lookout for any sign of pursuit. Yoshie's escape from Fukuoka prison was met with a massive manhunt. The authorities were determined to capture him, and they spared no effort in their search. Yoshie was constantly on the move, using his skills to evade capture and stay one step ahead of the police. The pursuit was relentless, with the police deploying helicopters, search dogs, and thousands of officers to track him down. Yoshie had to be resourceful and quick, using every trick he had learned over the years to stay hidden. The chase took Yoshie through rural areas, dense forests, and urban environments. He used disguises and false identities to avoid recognition, but the authorities were closing in. Despite his best efforts, Yoshie knew that he couldn't stay hidden forever. After weeks of evasion, Yoshie was finally cornered by the authorities. The relentless pursuit had taken its toll, and Yoshie was exhausted and worn down. He had managed to stay ahead of the police for as long as he could, but eventually his luck ran out. One fateful day, Yoshie was captured in a remote village in the Chugoku Mountains. The police had received a tip from a local resident who had spotted him. Yoshie was arrested and returned to Fukuoka prison, where he was placed in an even more secure cell than before. The authorities were determined to prevent any further escapes, and they subjected Yoshie to even stricter conditions. The prison was now on high alert, and the guards were more vigilant than ever. Yoshie's return to Fukuoka prison was a blow, but he refused to be defeated. He had endured countless hardships and challenges, and he was determined to continue fighting for his freedom. He spent his days in solitary confinement, plotting his next move and refining his escape plans. Despite the harsh conditions, Yoshie remained resolute. He knew that his spirit was unbreakable, and he was determined to find a way to escape once again. He used every opportunity to study the prison's security and look for any weaknesses. The days in prison were long and difficult, but Yoshie's determination never wavered. He continued to work on his escape plans, always hoping for the chance to prove that he could overcome even the most formidable obstacles. In 1947, Yoshie received an unexpected opportunity. A fire broke out in the prison's kitchen, causing extensive damage and creating chaos. The fire was quickly contained, but it had caused enough disruption to give Yoshie a chance. During the confusion, Yoshie managed to slip out of his cell and make his way to the damaged area of the prison. He used the commotion to his advantage, blending in with the smoke and debris as he made his way to the roof. Once again, Yoshie climbed down the outer wall and disappeared into the night. The authorities were caught off guard by his escape, and Yoshie took full advantage of the opportunity to flee. After his escape from Fukuoka prison, Yoshie fled to the northern island of Hokkaido. He hoped that the remote and rugged terrain would provide a safe haven, allowing him to start a new life away from the relentless pursuit of the authorities. In Hokkaido, Yoshie worked as a laborer and farmer using false identities to avoid detection. He built a new life for himself, but he was always aware of the risks. The authorities were still searching for him, and he had to remain vigilant to avoid capture. Yoshie found some semblance of peace in his new life, but he was never able to fully escape the shadow of his past. He lived in constant fear of being discovered, always on the lookout for any sign of the authorities. In 1950, after several years in Hokkaido, Yoshie made the difficult decision to return to Aomori. The village had changed in his absence, but it was still familiar to him. He hoped that by returning to his roots, he might find some sense of closure. Life in Aomori was different from what Yoshie remembered. The village had grown and modernized, but the harshness of the environment remained. Yoshie found work as a fisherman, using his skills from his youth to earn a living. Despite the changes, Yoshie felt a deep connection to his hometown. He had come full circle, returning to the place where it all began. But the past was never far behind, and Yoshie knew that he had to remain cautious. In 1953, Yoshie's past finally caught up with him. The authorities had not forgotten about him, and they continued to search for any sign of his whereabouts. A tip-off from a local informant led the police to Aomori, and Yoshie was once again a target. The police launched a massive operation to capture him, using all available resources to track him down. Yoshie was forced to go on the run once more, fleeing through the familiar landscapes of his childhood. The final showdown was intense, with Yoshie facing the full force of the authorities. He used all of his skills and experience to evade capture, but the odds were against him. Despite his best efforts, he was eventually cornered and arrested. Yoshie Shiratori's final capture marked the end of his remarkable journey. He was returned to prison, where he spent the remaining years of his life in confinement. His story became legendary, a testament to his unyielding spirit and determination. Despite his numerous escapes and the relentless pursuit of the authorities, Yoshie's legacy lived on. His story inspired others to challenge the system and to believe in the possibility of freedom, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Yoshie's life was a testament to the power of the human spirit and the desire for freedom. His escapes became a symbol of resistance against oppression, and his story was remembered as a powerful example of perseverance and courage. Yoshie Shiratori passed away in prison in 1961, but his story continued to captivate and inspire. His life was marked by a series of daring escapes and a relentless pursuit of freedom.